All right, so this is going to be hopefully a short one. I spent way too long on the previous one. So, okay, let's talk about some more consequences. So we've already talked about severe weather, extreme heat, environmental degradation, um, and water and food supply impacts that might lead to migrations and conflicts and wars and whatnot. I want to talk about a couple of other things that will lead to certain consequences, right? So air pollution, increased allergens, changes in vectors. Vectors is a term that we're probably getting more and more familiar with. It is an entity that can transmit a disease. So we are all vectors. Sometimes we think about animals as vectors. And then water quality. That'll probably not be today, but the next video after this one. So there's lots of consequences to talk about when we talk about increasing temperatures and increasing weather and increasing carbon dioxide. As temperatures increase, we end up producing more air pollutants. These are heavier particles than the nitrogen and oxygen that typically make up our air. And so these particulates can cause any number of reactions. They can affect our lung quality, and they can be pretty bad. Ozone, which we are very, very thankful for in the upper atmosphere, is actually really bad to breathe in. It's one of those pollutants that exists in cities that is really bad to have around you. I don't have any allergies, but I assume some of you do. And you won't be happy to hear that the allergy season is just going to be longer and longer, and there's going to be more potential allergens. As temperatures increase and the season duration and presence changes. We'll see more mold and more, both of those images upside down. You know what? I'm not going to go back and fix this. Increased ozone, as I was saying, can cause respiratory ailments, decreased lung function, and asthma. It's the same with particulate matter, right? You don't want particulates in your lungs. They can have horrific consequences, including cancer, if you've been exposed to them for too long. That's the reason why when you're looking for new apartments or houses, you always are on the lookout for mold and for any other exposure that you might have. So increased pollen, increased mold. That's right. That's where I was going with that. All of these are consequences of just changing temperatures and changing climates. Some of these, the increase in ozone, particulate matter, and toxic gases, I think are just broader consequences of the industrial age. We're just producing a lot of stuff. We're burning a lot of stuff that is not good for us. And it has health effects, right? So a number of you probably had childhood asthma. I did. There's a number of you that have allergies, that have particular worries about some of the stuff that people in previous generations didn't have. Now we should switch over to talking about diseases, and there's a couple of things to talk about here that are particularly troubling. So here, let me just give you some stats. undernutrition killing 3.5 million people every year, diarrhea killing another couple of million, malaria killing close to 1 million. The vast majority of these are children. That if you imagine airplanes full crashing every couple of hours, how much of a tragedy that would be if we heard this. If half the passengers were children. That's essentially what's happening, right? We've got hundreds of thousands of people constantly dying from these diseases and these issues, these ailments. And at least some of that, 140,000, we attribute to recent climate change. We expect climate change to affect what are called diseases of poverty, like diarrhea. So you can map out the incidences of diarrhea with incidences of temperature increase. And the mapping is pretty spot on. This is, again, one of those correlative studies that we were talking about, looking at spatial and temporal data, but makes some sort of sense. And it's particularly troubling that the countries that are in the equatorial band of the planet will suffer the most. A lot of these are already very poor countries. We have some reason to worry ourselves. A couple of years ago, some of you may remember the Zika outbreak that started encroaching into the United States. Zika was a parasite that was spread by mosquitoes, and it caused birth defects, which is why it was so particularly scary. I had a friend who was going to go to Brazil for a conference that year. I was going to go as well, but she was pregnant and decided not to go because of that. The United States, for the first time ever, issued a travel advisory against one of its own states, Florida, because Florida had a Zika outbreak. And the thing that's strange about that is, a couple of decades before, Zika, both Zika and those particular mosquito could not have come up from the equatorial region up to Florida. But they did. The band of habitable areas for mosquitoes increased. So climate change pushed mosquitoes up to more humid northern areas than they'd seen. And we'd see that with any number of different disease vectors. Right? So the book talks about ticks coming further south. But as temperature increases, rainfall, water storage, water levels, so too do animal populations migrate with these changes. These are things to keep an eye on. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and this is going to be short. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about water in the next few, and then we'll talk about some of the other broader issues. So to wrap up, air pollution, allergens, and disease vectors will change. Largely changes for the worse in these situations, but you can imagine people in certain parts of the world that would be happy with this. But the vast majority will be dissatisfied.